So today we are talking about the 13th animated film in our Disney Canon rewatch that we've been doing. And we are looking at Alice in Wonderland, one of my personal favorites. And you know what? On this watch, I liked it even more. I love this movie. It's definitely going to be higher in my rankings than it was previous time. And this movie has a really, really interesting backstory in the world of Walt Disney. This is a story that he loved. And I really think that Disney is not given enough credit for the bold, creative choices that he consistently would make. He would do a more conventional story that contained bold aspects in, say, a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and then would follow it up with something really different and bold with Pinocchio. And here you have the same thing happening with Cinderella. Gets them some financial footing. What do they do next? They do Alice in Wonderland. And I think that's really cool. And I think it's interesting that he had such a history with this property. If you know anything about Disney, you know that one of his first successful shorts that he ever did for the Laugh-O-Grams company was a series based on Alice in Wonderland with a little girl and her interacting with the animated characters. And so he loves Alice in Wonderland. He was going to do Alice in Wonderland instead of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs for a period of time, but there was a very popular live action version of Alice in Wonderland in the late 30s that they just didn't feel like they could compete with, I guess. And so he put it off. And then it came out in 1951. And this film is kind of divisive, I would say, in the world of Disney fandom. It's a film that is, of course, based on the Lewis Carroll stories. And it doesn't have a traditional narrative, and so sometimes that bothers people, but I love it for that reason. And it wasn't very popular when it came out. That's the sad part about Disney, is every time you would take these creative risks, they wouldn't do that well at the box office, and they wouldn't do that well critically either. And this movie didn't become popular until the 1960s, when it got re-released and sort of discovered by sort of hippie college groups discovered Alice in Wonderland, and they kind of embraced it as sort of this cult classic. It's Disney's first cult classic. And so, yeah, we can be grateful for the hippies for Alice in Wonderland. And so Alice in Wonderland, of course, is the classic story of Alice, and she is telling her, at the very beginning, she's telling her teacher that she would rather live in a world of nonsense. And she would rather live in a world where up is down and right is left, and a world where there are pictures in every book. And so she basically gets the chance to live in that world. Alice in Wonderland is basically her meeting one character after another character after another character after another character. There's not a overarching plot in the same way that a typical movie might have, or fairy tale or something like that. But it works because you don't stay with any of these characters too long. So you just get it, it's one of the problems, and I'll be talking about the Tim Burton version, but one of the problems with the Tim Burton version is you stay with these characters sometimes too long. And I wouldn't want to be with the Queen of Hearts, for instance, for an entire movie. It's just too much. She's too much. And there's something about even the Mad Hatter, that scene, it's perfect in this short bit. And so you add all these pieces together and it just becomes really delightful. And I was surprised at how much I laughed in watching this movie. And I think that's because of the nonsense of it and the silliness of it. And also, just even things that are kind of villainous, like the Queen of Hearts, are so over the top that it is kind of funny. Seeing her turn red and freak out, is kind of funny. And I just think it is so pretty, and it kind of tries to ask questions, but in a really nonsensical way. That's the whole point of the caterpillar, for instance, that he thinks he's asking all these questions. Who are you? But it's complete nonsense. Like, philosophy really can be in a lot of different ways. And of course you have the nonsense of the unbirthday, and you have the the nonsense of the white rabbit and the house, and the solutions for how to get her to be out of the house. And it's just a whole bunch of fun, different little vignettes, kind of, more in a way, with Alice meeting these creatures. And so I just really enjoy it. There's great music throughout. There's comedy. There's moments of tension. It's so beautiful. You have the amazing artwork of Mary Blair, probably at the height of its powers in this film. It's interesting because with this movie, the backgrounds, because Mary Blair is normally known for her beautiful backgrounds, and we saw that in Cinderella. Well, in this film, most of the backgrounds are black. But if you look, you can just see her visual style in all of the character design in the world itself, which is really, really interesting, especially if you think about the Tim Burton version, which is so crazy in all of its backgrounds. And yet it doesn't capture any of that feel of what at least Wonderland is to me. And so it's interesting that black with these character designs is more authentic and more capturing of this sense of diving into a girl's imagination than what the other version is for me. And I just really like this idea of sort of Alice being presented with her fantasy and what she ends up coming to think about her fantasy. The things that she thinks would be the best way of life. Turns out, she gets sick of it really quick. Which is interesting when you think about it, that a lot of the things that we think, oh, that would be so wonderful. I wish things were that way. But if we were presented in a world of our wishes, maybe we wouldn't really like it very much. So I think that's kind of a little bit of a message in the movie. So Alice in Wonderland has the most songs of any Disney movie, although most of them are 30 seconds to a minute, so they're not long songs, but they are really, really delightful. A great voice cast. This is probably the best voice cast in all of Disney history. You have Catherine Beaumont as Alice, and she gives such a depth, and she sounds young and old at the same time. It's a great, great choice they did with her. And Sterling Holloway as the Cheshire Cat. And he, of course, is the voice of Winnie the Pooh. Later on, you had Verna Felton as the Queen of Hearts, and she was the fairy godmother. You had Bill Thompson as the White Rabbit and the Dodo. Richard Hayden as the Caterpillar. Jerry Colonna as the March Hare. And Edwin as the Mad Hatter. The list goes on and on and on. And it's just every step that she takes. I think this movie would be a lot harder to deal with if it was boring. But really, it just clips along so well. There's one situation, and then she comes into another situation, and then one situation, and she comes into another situation, and again, and again, and again, and then it's over and done. And so that's perfect in my book as far as how to structure this kind of story. The only part of Alice in Wonderland I think doesn't really fit, doesn't really work. I don't hate it, but I think the Walrus and the Carpenter story, it doesn't fit because it's an actual narrative. It's not really nonsense. And so I feel like it sort of sticks out of place. And it sort of takes you away from the movie, where the rest of the movie is all of these characters and all of this nonsense, and then all of a sudden you have this linear story of this Walrus and the Carpenter. And so for me, it doesn't really work that way. And so yeah, I love Alice in Wonderland. Like I said, it was even better on this rewatch than I remembered. So I give Alice in Wonderland an A. So yeah, there you go. Thanks so much. Please subscribe to my channel. Let me know what you think of Alice in Wonderland, and I will talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.